Macy Golder on the line from, she writes for the Giant Insider and has done some recent work for Rutgers football on Our Vision. Macy.
Hey, good to see you again. Thanks.
Yeah, so we got those college football rankings that seem to get everybody all uptight. Everybody's a bit angered, unless your team's in the top 4, of course, and it creates all sorts of excitement, all sorts of drama and discussion. So we've got the top 4 the way they stand now. I understand you've got a few teams out there that you're looking across the country and feel might have a chance to move their way into a better position.
Yeah, so, the coolest thing about the playoff schedule is that you kind of can root for another team that maybe you'd never root for before. If your team has played them recently, you want to see that other team win because it only makes their number better. So I think some of the teams to kind of watch out for would be LSU. They're at number 9 right now at 7-1, but if any team in front of them loses and they win one, they're 8-1, which is moving up with Stanford, which is putting them with Notre Dame. They're up there. Another team I'd definitely watch out for, like I just mentioned, would be Stanford. McCaffrey seems to have it all there, and I think he could make a difference. The biggest one is Baylor. For some reason, I'm kind of rooting for them. I just think with Gerardus Stidham coming in as a backup quarterback, there's something about them. I think they could push their way in. The Big 12 is tough. They haven't really gotten in yet, and there's been a lot of, I guess, heated discussion when you say people have been upset about that, but I think Baylor could have a shot.
All right, let's see. We'll start with LSU. My thoughts on LSU, obviously, they came into last week's game against Alabama, the number 2 ranking in the college football playoff standings. Got knocked around a little bit by Alabama, but playing in what most people consider to be not only the best conference in college football, but the best division in college football at 8-1. Got a couple tough matchups coming up with Arkansas, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss off the top of my head in some sort of order. So they have 3 not great opponents, but very decent opponents, very capable opponents that will get them more respect. So with one loss playing in the SEC and that one loss coming to an Alabama team that many consider to be the best team in the country, I think you got a good point with LSU, despite getting knocked back last week, that they have 3 quality opponents in front of them and playing in the SEC. And if they can get through with one loss, they're a wild card for sure. Stanford is kind of the last bastion of hope for the Pac-12. I know that Utah has just one loss. They're sitting at number 10, but Stanford at number 7, gaining much respect since their loss seems like it was like 4 years ago, since it was in week 1 at Northwestern. And a lot of people are giving Stanford a bit of a pass on that game, it being a 9 a.m. Pacific time game. Stanford has looked very dominant in recent weeks. Their huge game, Notre Dame, that's almost like a play-in game with Notre Dame at 4 and Stanford at 7, and the Cardinal needing to win that game. Of course, they've got to win out, and they've got a game against Utah, and even though the Utes are back a few spaces, that's going to be a game that's going to help Stanford if they can win that one. Baylor, we don't know much about Baylor at this point. We think they're good. We think they're really good. You mentioned Gerardus Stidham, who, despite his inexperience, is a 5-star recruit, came in as a blue chip prospect, and has really cleaned it up in garbage time in non-competitive games. And then he finally got his first start against Kansas State, put up some big numbers with 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. So Stidham looks to be a good quarterback. Inexperience, but he gets his first real test, fortunately for him, at home. And it's a game we're going to talk about right here with Oklahoma taking on Baylor. Oklahoma, Texas, kind of the stalwarts, the traditional powers in the Big 12, but Baylor and TCU have owned the conference the last few years. So just your thoughts about Baylor and Oklahoma, the first of the really titanic matchups that we're going to see over the next month in the Big 12.
Yeah, I think that's a huge game. I mean, it is where Game Day Live is going to be. They're ready for this one. Baylor's only going in as a 2.5 favorite. So they went in earlier as starting at 6, and now they're only down to 2.5. So I think it's a pretty fair matchup, even though it's a 6 versus a 12. I think it's going to be a little bit of a battle of quarterbacks. You know, you have Stidham, who's going to have to prove himself again, coming in, maybe beginner's luck, or maybe he really is talented. He is a 5-star recruit, but even Baker Mayfield, he shows leadership, and I think if he steps it up, that is what is going to bring the upset and what's going to make it possible. But then you have to remember Oklahoma has a great defense, And I think that's what might challenge Stidham.
Macy, does anybody in the Big 12 have a great defense? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. That's my own knock on the Big 12. I don't think anybody has a great defense. But as it pertains to Big 12 defenses, yes, Oklahoma, I believe, is #1 ranked in the Big 12 in defense, and that's going to be a major test for Stidham. Zach Sanchez, one of the better corners in the country, playing for Oklahoma. Eric Stryker, defensive end, is a terror. Oklahoma has, in spots, just NFL talent on defense, no question about it. I'm interested about the point spread as well. Usually when there's that kind of movement, it's because there's an injury. Obviously, the betting public out there really loves the Sooners. To have knocked that point spread from 6 all the way down to 2.5. That's a pretty big movement throughout the week. We have yet to see Baylor line up against anybody of Oklahoma's caliber. Seems like a lot of people are likening Oklahoma's run to what Ohio State did last year, losing to an inferior team early in the season, as Oklahoma did against Texas, and then putting on a run. The difference I'll make at this point is we haven't seen Oklahoma play the big boys in the Big 12. So it starts this Saturday, and obviously the loser pretty much can kiss their hopes goodbye, especially if it's the Sooners. Whereas Baylor's get a shot to move on, even with a loss, an outside shot. The Big 12 is going to start to get respect, possibly, from the College Football Playoff Committee this week. Another big one, Macy, looking to the SEC. Alabama lined up against LSU. I think some of us were a bit surprised how easily they controlled the line of scrimmage and just proved to be dominating on defense in that one. So we got Bama going to Mississippi State with Dak Prescott, maybe the best quarterback in the SEC.
Yeah, Dak Prescott's definitely saying they are, that he is one of the best ones out there. He's good, and this is a big game for Alabama. Even though Mississippi State is 20, it's a rivalry game. They call it the 90-mile drive, and I don't want to say there's going to be an upset because I'm not a professional. But
pull the trigger.
But you got to take your chances, right? So I'm saying maybe Mississippi State could pull this one off. It is the 100th meeting between the two teams, and Alabama hasn't lost since 2007 to Mississippi State. So I have a good feeling for Mississippi State in this one. I think Dak Prescott's just he could be a one-man show, but he also has those large receivers. Worst comes to worst, and even if those guys aren't there, he's got his own feet. He can go.
So, Macy, I'm going to bore you with reflecting a little bit here because I know this rivalry pretty well because for 6 years I was a sports director at a CBS station down there. So I used to make that drive back and forth at 90 miles. I'll believe you that it was 90 miles. I have no idea. But, yeah, it took about that long between Tuscaloosa and Starkville. Mississippi State obviously has nothing close to the Alabama pedigree overall, but saw some exciting games during that time. Mississippi State, formidable football program, and if you've got the quarterback in place as they have for the past few years, that's why they've taken a bit of an elevation in the SEC. Alabama going on the road, if you believe in letdowns, maybe after that titanic matchup against LSU, maybe they pull off the throttle, maybe they're a little bit beat up after a very physical game where Mississippi State's been able to kind of ease into this one and ramp up to face the Crimson Tide. Mississippi State, a 7.5-point underdog in this one. Based on face value, I would think the Bama would be a decent bet. But again, we've got the letdown factor, and going through a grueling SEC schedule, I wouldn't be surprised to see Alabama just squeak by in this one. But I'm going to go bigger than the point spread for the Tide in this one.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like I said, Bama's number 2. But if Mississippi State has the fuel and their fans support them, Alabama could be out of the top spots in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's a tough place to play. They're in Stark Vegas, as they like to call themselves. It's not the most it's not necessarily the mecca of entertainment, so it's a bit of an irony that they like to call themselves Stark Vegas, but a difficult place to play there at Mississippi State, and the Bulldogs are a formidable team, and this is going to be their biggest test to date by far. Should be interesting. Saturday night in Starkville, Mississippi State, Bama. Now we've got a game that's a little bit off the radar, especially if you're focused on the Power 5. But Memphis beat Ole Miss, which until a crazy finish against Arkansas last week, Ole Miss was in the driver's seat in the SEC West. Paxton Lynch, most people are considering him to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft at quarterback for Memphis, taking on a Houston team that is still undefeated and beat a Vandy team out of the SEC a couple weeks ago. And it's pretty much all in front of Houston in terms of facing some difficult teams and maybe gaining a little bit of respect. I don't have their ranking in front of me. I think they're around 16 or 17 in the college football playoff rankings. So we got Houston and Memphis.
Yeah, there's only 3 ranked versus ranked games this weekend, and this is the lucky third one. So it is 16 versus 25. You can't always pick them all, but I think it could be an interesting game. Greg Ward at quarterback for Houston. He hasn't, he's kind of been under the radar, but he's still been pretty good. They're still number 16, but you have to kind of look at who they've played and what kind of schedule they've had so far. So you see a team that's undefeated, but at the same time they're 16, but at the same time, who have they played? Like you said, Paxton Lynch for Memphis, he's great. Also, Frazier has been helping him out a lot too. So I think this will be a good game. It's a game to watch. There's not too much going on in college football this weekend, so it is something that could change. But at a 16 spot, I still think that could have an impact on some of these other games.
Well, the non-Power 5 team that goes undefeated is always an interesting experiment for the College Football Playoff Committee to see how they treat that team. And like you say, Houston really hasn't beaten anybody to date. Their schedule's backloaded because of the conference they play in. When we say backloaded, we mean relative to the rest of their schedule. So it's not a great schedule for Houston, but playing some decent football teams, starting with Memphis coming up this week. And we'll see if the Cougars can run the table. And who knows, if we get 1 and 2 lost teams in other conferences, maybe they squeak in some fashion. Don't really see it happening, but we're going to find out about Houston coming up against Memphis this Saturday. Macy Golder joining us from the Giant Insider and also doing some work for Rutgers football this past summer. Macy, appreciate the insight.
Thank you.